Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist, and the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is author Amy Jane Cohen. Amy resides in Philadelphia and served for 10 years as the Director of Education for History Making Productions, and she also taught for 20 years in middle schools, high schools, colleges, and universities in the greater Philadelphia area. When she is not writing books, she also does guest speaking appearances where she discusses African American history, Jewish history, and women's history. She has won numerous awards for her teaching work, her contributions to educational documentaries, and her international volunteer work. And in February 2024, Amy published her first book, Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, Deep Roots, Continuing Legacy, which has earned rave reviews among her peers in American academe. Tonight we'll be discussing her masterpiece. Amy, welcome to the show. It is a great honor and privilege to have you here. And I'd like to start off by asking you, when did your interest in African American history begin?
Well, first, Matthew, I just want to thank you for that warm introduction. And to answer that question, we'll have to go back to my teaching days. I was a social studies teacher at the School District of Philadelphia, teaching middle and high school, as you said. And in 2005, Philadelphia became the first school district in the nation to require a year of African American history for every high school student. And at that point, I had taught a History of Philadelphia elective briefly, and you can't learn Philadelphia history or teach it without delving a bit into Black history. Well, when this mandate came down from the school district, no one in my social studies department had ever taught African American history. Like most social studies departments across the city and the country, we had no African American members. So with my little bit of local knowledge, I volunteered to teach the new course, which took me on an extremely steep and gratifying learning curve where I really came to see both my city of Philadelphia and the country as a whole in a new light. So really it was in teaching that course that I became passionate and deeply interested in African American history, particularly Philadelphia African American history.
Okay. Amy, how long did it take for you to write your book, Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape?
Well, what I always say, because I am asked this question often, is that it took me a year to write, but it represented 20 years of teaching, learning, reading, writing. It was really the culmination of 20 years that I was able to spend 1 year distilling into the book.
Okay. Amy, please tell our listeners about Charles Blockson's efforts to commemorate Pennsylvania's slave trade with a marker.
Well, I'll first explain briefly who Charles Blockson is and a little bit about his connection to our state marker program, which is actually the content of the first chapter of the book. Charles Blockson grew up just outside of Philadelphia in a town called Norristown. He became a collector of African American history materials, from documents to books to sheet music to artwork. And his collection is now at Temple University. But back in the early 90s, he recognized that, in different places around the state, we have these blue and gold state markers of his important historical locations. And in 1990, there was only one in the entire city of Philadelphia that directly related to the African American experience. So Blockson used his collection and his knowledge to apply for literally dozens of historical markers, and many of them were approved. So if you look at our African American history-related historical markers around the city now, and about a third of them are now related to African American history. Many of them will say 1991, 1992, and those are part of his original tranche of markers.
Okay.
But then in 2015, he applied for a marker that is still right by the Delaware River, that talks about the slave trade in Philadelphia. And he later remarked that of all the markers he was responsible for, that marker about the slave trade was the one of which he was most proud.
Okay. All right, Amy, who was Richard Allen, and why was he significant to Philadelphia's Black history?
Yeah, Richard Allen is just an incredible man. He was born into slavery, actually in Philadelphia in 1760. I won't tell you his whole story because that would, take hours and hours, but he eventually bought his own freedom, and in 1780, he had been in Delaware. He came back to Philadelphia, and he was a Methodist preacher. He had felt the call to preach, and he met another active Methodist who had also freed himself from slavery eventually, named Absalom Jones, and really they were such a formidable partnership. They started something called the Free Africa Society, which was like a mutual aid society. This is back in the 1780s. Richard Allen founded a church that still is at the same location today at 6th and Lombard in Philadelphia, called Mother Bethel Church. But he also founded the entire AME, the African Methodist Episcopal Church denomination, that is a national and even international denomination. He founded schools. He was involved in abolition. He was involved in the first Black People's Conventions. He was an early activist in the Underground Railroad. Mother Bethel Church was used as an Underground Railroad site. And I could go on and on with all these individual things, but the big point about Richard Allen is that he, and again along with Absalom Jones, really laid the groundwork for Philadelphia to become the capital of free Black America from about 1790 up until the Civil War. Philadelphia was the most active, the most important, the most vibrant center of free Black life, and he laid that foundation.
Okay, Amy, please tell our listeners, who was Octavius Cato, and why was he significant to Philadelphia's Black history?
Well, I'm going to say Octavius Cato, although some people say Cato, others some people say Cato, a lot of people say Cato, but I use the pronunciation Cato, which is a longer story. But he was born in 1839 in South Carolina, but came with his family to Philadelphia, where he became a star pupil at a school called the Institute for Colored Youth. After graduating first in his class, he then became a teacher and an administrator at the school. But in addition to that, he was a civil rights activist. He was a Civil War recruiter for the Union Army. He was an athlete. He worked on the movement to desegregate streetcars in Philadelphia, and probably most important of all, he was a leader in gaining passage of the 15th Amendment, giving Black men the right to vote. unfortunately, in 1871, the first election here in Philadelphia after the passage of the 15th Amendment, there was a lot of anti-Black Election Day violence, and he was assassinated in cold blood on that day in front of eyewitnesses. His assassin was eventually tried, and all-white jury did not convict him. But at the time that he was killed, this is in 1871, he was only 32 years old. He was a nationally known figure.
Ouch.
His obituary ran in the New York Times, it ran in Harper's Weekly. But then over the decades, many Philadelphians, the vast majority of Philadelphians, his name kind of went into obscurity. But in 2017, a statue of Caddo, really it's more than a statue, it's a whole memorial. You can learn his whole life story if you visit Philadelphia City Hall. When that memorial was dedicated and that statue was unveiled, it was the first statue of an individual African American in the city of Philadelphia on public land.
Wow.
Which is really remarkable that it took until 2017, but at least now he has become virtually a household name in Philadelphia.
Very good, very good. Amy, based on your research and your opinion, who was the greatest unsung hero or heroine in Philadelphia's African American history?
Well, there are many to choose from, but I'm going to choose a heroine, a woman named Caroline Davenport Moore, who was the executive secretary of the NAACP in the 1940s, and she organized a movement to demand that the PTC, the Philadelphia Transportation Corporation, which later became our mass transit called SEPTA. But anyway, she led this movement to get the PTC to hire Black men as drivers of buses and trolleys and so forth. And this was during the Second World War, and the Fair Employment Practices Commission had said that there had to be fairness in hiring. Eventually, after organizing a march and so forth, the PTC said, okay, we will promote some Black men to these roles. But when they announced that, there was a wildcat strike by the white drivers and of buses and trolleys. And this happens in August of 1944. And if listeners aren't aware of this, Philadelphia was a major center of war production.
Yes, yes.
And workers could not get to their factories. And eventually, believe it or not, Roosevelt had to send in armed members of the military to protect Black drivers once the white drivers were forced. I'm not telling this exactly in the right order. The white drivers were told, if you don't get back to work, you are going to lose your draft exemption that you currently have for driving, and you will be blackballed from working in any war industry. So after 5 days, the drivers did go back to work, but that picking up where I was, Roosevelt had to send in the military to ride on buses and trolleys along with the Black drivers to make sure that nothing happened to them.
You know, Amy, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's such a remarkable story. And Caroline Davenport Moore, a woman, during this era where women weren't in as many leadership positions. The reason I don't tell this story in my book is that there's no representation of the strike in the Philadelphia landscape, and because my book connects history to the landscape, I don't tell the story in the book, but it's such an amazing story, and I hope that omission is taken care of at some point.
What you told me, my father was a young teenage boy during World War II, and he has vivid memories of when he would ride the trolley around the city, of seeing soldiers in the cars and all that. So it kind of woke a memory of mine and all that.
Yeah, it's amazing because they were not on the cars for that long, but it was so shocking. I had a history teacher. He's now 90 years old. He was a young child, and he still remembered it.
Yes.
Because it was just so confusing to see armed men on Philadelphia transportation during the Second World War.
Yes. Okay, moving along. Amy, did you play any role in the commemoration of the President's House in Center City, Philadelphia, and its emphasis on commemorating President George Washington's African-American slaves who served there? Did you play any role in that at all?
I did not, because the discussions about that memorial being constructed were really predated my time teaching African American history, but by the time it was unveiled in 2010, I did have students who were on the scene as reporters. I forgot how they got that plum assignment, and I very much talked about it, and it's a really central chapter in my book, but I can't take any credit for its creation.
Okay. Now, Amy, does your book in any way, shape, or form touch on the African American experience in the Philadelphia sports landscape?
Well, I will have to admit that there is a disclaimer in my introduction to the book where I admit that I gave very short shrift to artists, athletes, and musicians. I have a few musicians in there, but my hope is that someone will pursue writing a book similar to mine, but whose passions are more in that area. But other than Octavius Catto, who played second base for a team called the Pythians, and Paul Robeson, who was a fabulous athlete, I do not have a big emphasis on athletics.
Okay, it was just a little guess on my part. It should be written about, considering the fact it's kind of ironic that especially in baseball. I mean, the Phillies were the last National League team to desegregate, and the A's were very reluctant to desegregate. I mean, it wasn't until like 1953 until they finally put their first African American player on the field and all that. This is a city of brotherly love and the seed American independence, and they were one of the slowest, in desegregating its baseball teams. It's a bit of a tragedy.
And this is where Jackie Robinson had some of his worst moments.
Yes. Okay. Amy, considering the fact that Philadelphia has experienced significant racial tensions, how much in the past decades, how much progress, in your opinion, has the city of Philadelphia made in reducing racial tensions and enhancing the role of African Americans and indeed all non-white peoples in the socio-economic, political, and cultural landscape?
Well, kind of looking at things just in terms of people at the leadership level. Sherelle Parker, our mayor, is African American. We have many people of color. The most people in our city council are people of color. The the leaders of our major philanthropies, like the Philadelphia Foundation and the Lentz Foundation, are people of color. The head of the Philadelphia Cultural Alliance is an African-American woman. So there's certainly a lot of representation of people of color in positions of power in Philadelphia. Yes, there's much more progress that needs to be made. I would say that the legacy of redlining is such that there's still a lot of neighborhood segregation. There's a lot of issues around gentrification. There's a lot of wealth inequality. But Black people in positions of leadership, influence, and so forth, they are numerous right now.
Okay. Amy, just recently there was an attempt, I saw something on the news, there was an attempt by the Trump administration to remove and or suppress any mention of Philadelphia's slave experience, especially at the president's house. How concerned are you about these recent actions?
I am extremely concerned, Matthew. I actually wrote an op-ed about it that was published in Hidden City, Philadelphia, a publication I write for. Extremely concerned. Now, when it was discovered back in the very early 2000s that slave quarters that President Washington had built for his enslaved people that would live and serve him when Philadelphia was the capital of the United States, when it was discovered that those slave quarters were directly adjacent to a new home for the Liberty Bell. The initial response of the Park Service back in 2001, 2002 was, well, yeah, that's interesting. We're not going to do anything about it. And then because of activism, because of historians getting involved, because of the big grassroots movement,
yes,
by a group called the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, led by my now friend Michael Cord, not only was it acknowledged as juxtaposition, but an entire memorial to those enslaved people was built at the president's house site, and it was the first memorial about slavery on federal land.
Wow.
And the fact that that was in Philadelphia and it was unveiled in 2010, as I said earlier, to me it was just this sea change in how history was represented in the city.
Yes.
And, as I said, it's something that I feature in my book. I talk about it very frequently when I'm doing book talks, and seeing what has happened in the last couple of months of trying to soften or even erase the mentions of slavery at that site, it's heartbreaking and it's enraging, but people are fighting back. The Philadelphia Inquirer has been doing a really good job of writing both news articles and printing op-eds about this. So if, folks are interested, they can definitely look online and find out about the organizations that are fighting back. There's already been one demonstration. I'm sure there will be more. And I'll tell you this, Matthew, if they try and change those signs, I will chain myself to a sign. I'm telling you, I feel really strongly about it that it was such a mark of progress to get the president's house constructed and framed the way that the history is framed. And Philadelphia is not going to let that be erased easily.
I applaud your courage and I commend you for it. What, Amy, following up on that question, what do you make of national efforts at whitewashing and or quote-unquote justifying the existence of slavery in America? It's like in Florida saying, oh, it was quote-unquote beneficial, or even removing all commemorations of non-white heroes or heroines in the anti-slavery or the civil rights struggle. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's really terrifying, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but there is an effort afoot to turn history into just kind of cheerleading, and as you use the term whitewashing, getting rid of all the ugly parts. And history is uncomfortable, and history requires critical thinking, and history requires understanding that there's multiple perspectives, and history requires, understanding that you need evidence in order to make a point. And I think that this whitewashing of history is just part and parcel of what authoritarianism requires.
Yeah.
Is that we don't use the critical thinking, we don't entertain the multiple perspectives, we don't require evidence. So I think it's really frightening.
Do you feel, I'm going to share, my personal feeling is, and tell me if you concur with this, I'm seeing what is a movement is replacing education with fascist indoctrination on the same pattern as like Nazi Germany or Soviet Communist Russia or Mao's China. Do you feel the same way, or do you think I'm being hyperbolic?
Oh, no, I think that that's what's happening. And I think when you hear the excuse, as they used in Florida, oh, well, we don't want to talk about slavery because we don't want the little white children to feel guilty for the sins of their ancestors. It's not about the little children's feelings. It's about trying to erase the uncomfortable parts of history and go back to some kind of, white male patriarchy. That's really what it's about. So I think that we can't just write it off as, well, that, it's not a big deal. History is a big deal, and trying to, the parallels in history of trying to whitewash a nation's past are the ugly ones that you've mentioned.
When I saw that Florida ordinance and all that, one thing that struck me, they said, oh, slavery taught African Americans quote-unquote skills, but doing my own real research, one skill that was not taught to African Americans, especially in the majority of the slave states, and starting was in the early 1830s, it was a crime for any African American, whether they be slave or free living in a majority of slave states, to learn how to read and write. It was a crime.
Absolutely, and that's why education has been, is now, and will continue to be a form of resistance, particularly within the Black community.
Yes.
I talked about the Institute for Colored Youth,
yes.
The power of reading and writing and learning history. It is dangerous. It is threatening.
Yes. Amy, let's talk about yourself. Where were you born and raised, and where did you go to school?
Okay. I was born and raised in Center City, Philadelphia. And so I'm an almost lifelong Philadelphian. I've spent the vast majority of my life here. As a child, I went to Friends Select school in Center City from kindergarten through 12th grade, which had a big influence on my orientation toward social justice, and also where I learned how to write and develop my passion for history. And then I got my undergraduate degree in history at Brown University, my master's in education at University of Maryland, and my master's in history at University of Pennsylvania.
Wow. Amy, what was it like working with History Making Productions? What's it like doing documentary work?
Well, initially when I was working for History Making Productions, where I went literally directly from the classroom to working there, my initial responsibility was to develop lesson plans and educational materials to help teachers use our documentaries in their classrooms. But over time, I came up with ideas for films, one about the freedom fighters, who were the young people who, under Cecil B. Moore's lead, marched around the walls of Girard College in 1965 to help desegregate that school. I was one of the producers of a film called Cecil's People, that's available online and on YouTube. And then I also produced a film about Octavius Catto, and that was because I knew that this memorial was going to be dedicated at City Hall, and I knew that most people in Philadelphia had no idea who he was, and I saw it as a teachable moment. So I produced a 15-minute film, Octavius Catto, A Legacy for the 21st Century, and that is also available online and on YouTube. And I will have to let you know that both of those films did win Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
Yes. Oh, out of curiosity, when Ken Burns did, I think it was Ken Burns, he did that series on Ben Franklin. Did you make any contribution at all? Especially when they were discussing his works at, eliminating slavery in Pennsylvania. Did you play any role in that, Amy?
I did not. Productions is probably best known for our series, Philadelphia, The Great Experiment, that tells the story of Philadelphia from the 1600s to the 1990s in 14 half-hour installments. And actually two of those episodes focus on Ben Franklin, but I don't know if there is any crossover with the Ken Burns project.
Okay. Amy, whenever I interview an author, I always love to ask the standard question. Who were your favorite authors when you were growing up? And of those favorite authors, did any of them light the spark inside you to become a writer or perhaps influence your writing style?
Okay, well, Matthew, I'm going to play the politician here because you told me you were going to ask me that question, and I was not the biggest reader as a young person. I read what I had to for school, but I did want to share with you real quickly 5 books that I've read over, maybe the past 20 years that I think have really shaped my thinking about our topic today, African American history, and also how it's reflected in the landscape. And these are not local books, but they're all, I think, excellent. First, 2 autobiographies, John Hope Franklin's Mirror to America and John Lewis's Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement. Excellent autobiographies. A book called Lose Your Mother by Sadia Hartman that is about, it's kind of creatively written, but about the slave trade and the African role in the slave trade. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Of course, probably many people have read that or heard of it, but I can't not say it. And then finally, in terms of the things that I talk about in my book, about the landscape and how it reflects our values and reflects our history, I want to recommend a book called How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, which is phenomenal.
Okay. Amy, last question. What is your next book project, and when can we expect its release?
Well, Matthew, I think that's a question that my publisher, Temple University Press, has asked as well. But I really love writing for Hidden City, Philadelphia. I wrote for them monthly for about 2.5 years and dropped that to write the book. I've gone back to writing for them sporadically. And I have an article I'm really excited about that will be coming out in the next 2 weeks that has to do with redlining and black service during the Second World War, two topics I touched on really briefly here.
Yep.
But if people want to see any of my past writing or hear about any events I'll be doing, I do a lot of public speaking, or see this upcoming article once it comes out, that's all at my website, amyjanecohen.com.
Oh, yes. Amy, please tell our listeners, where can they find this book? Where can readers find your book, Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape? And do you have a website?
Yeah, so the website is amyjanecohen.com, and on the homepage there's links to buying it, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Temple Press, bookshop.org, but I always, if folks are local, I always recommend going to independent booksellers, so they have my book at, just to name a few, Uncle Bobby's in Germantown. It's at Booked in Chestnut Hill. It's at Head House Books, and it's at the Narberth Bookshop. It's at a lot of local bookstores, so shop those first if you're able to. But otherwise, it is available online at all the familiar places. And again, further information, or if you want to reach out to me directly, amyjanecohen.com.
Amy, I want to thank you so much for appearing on the show. And if you ever do come out with another book, please let me know. I want you on my show again. You are most always welcome.
Well, thank you, Matthew. It's really been fun.
Thank you. You take care.
All right, you too.
All right, bye-bye.
So long.
Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show, where I will be interviewing author S.C. Hamill. Thank you and good night.